welcome to Don't Call Me Martha, Episode 4, Let's Make Pitas.
Today we're going to make pita bread. Now pita bread is a yeast bread, and a lot of people find yeast breads intimidating, but they're not difficult to make. They just take time. Now this pita bread recipe comes from a book called The Bread Book, and it's by Linda Collister and Anthony Blake. Start off by putting about a quarter cup of lukewarm water in the bowl. Now lukewarm means that if you put your finger in there it feels warm, but it's not hot enough to burn. And that's because yeast is a living organism and you want to make sure you don't kill it, because if you kill it then it's not going to rise. First thing we're going to do is proof our yeast, which means we're going to make sure it's still alive. And the way you do that is you put it in some warm water with a little bit of sugar and see if it bubbles up. So we're going to put 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast, which is the same as one of those little envelopes of yeast. And a 1/2 teaspoon of sugar. The sugar is it's food for the yeast and it helps it to get moving. You can do it without the sugar, but it might take a little bit longer. So you just sprinkle that in there, and you can kind of swish it around a little bit if you want. All you're trying to do is get the yeast wet. And then you can see it's just kind of looks like ground up stuff on there. We're going to let it sit for about 10 to 15 minutes and we'll see if the yeast is still good. Now it's been about 10 minutes, and as you can see the yeast has kind of gotten poofy, which means it's good to go. If it was still just sitting there looking all flat and grainy, then you would assume it was dead. You can just dump it out and start over again. You haven't really wasted much except a little bit of yeast, which was dead already. So since it's good, then we're going to add the rest of our water, which is still a little bit warm. We're going to add a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil. We're going to add about 1 1/4 teaspoons of salt. Now you don't want to add your salt when you're proofing the yeast, because the salt can prevent it from actually growing as quickly, and you might think it was dead when it wasn't. Then we're going to add 2 cups of bread flour. One, 2. Stir that up. Stir it up good till it makes a smooth batter, and then you need to add 1 1/2 to 2 cups of all-purpose flour. Now the reason you use half bread flour and half all-purpose flour is you don't want your pitas to get too tough. If you went with all bread flour, you end up with a higher gluten content, and that can make your pitas kind of tough. If you're making regular bread, then you want a higher gluten content. Put in 1.5 cups of the regular flour and just stir it in, and it probably will need a little more than this, but you want to start out low. Okay, when you've got your dough into kind of a lump, you take the remaining 1/2 cup and sprinkle a little bit on your counter, and then you can start kneading your dough. You want to knead it until it's nice and smooth. Now if you wanted to, you could have done this first part in your bread machine and just set it on the dough setting if you have one. Or you could have done it if you have a KitchenAid, you can do it with a dough hook and just like let it knead, but I like to do it by hand. It doesn't really take that much more work. It's kind of fun because then you can say you made it completely by hand. So knead it until it's nice and smooth, and add more flour as you need to. You can see it's still kind of sticky, so just throw in a little more flour and knead. You can tell the bread is kneaded well because it's feeling smooth, and it kind of pushes back. When I push on it, it resists, which means it's built the elasticity that it needs to rise well. So that means it's getting pretty close to done. Took about 5 to 7 minutes, not too long. You just fold and push, fold and push, turn it half a turn, fold and push, turn, fold and push. Real easy. So when it's done, you kind of tuck it all under into a neat ball like that. Then we're going to oil a bowl and put the dough in there to rise. To use the same bowl that you mixed your dough in, you'd have to wash it first, or you can get a clean one. Doesn't matter, you end up washing 2 bowls either way. Pour a little bit of oil in the bottom, just maybe half a tablespoon. Just enough that you can take your dough and kind of roll it around in the oil. So you oil the bowl and the dough so they don't stick to each other. Keeps the dough moist while it's rising. Nice and greasy. And then you just put it in a warm place, cover it with some plastic wrap, and let it rise. And you'll know it's done because you can see that this ball of dough kind of halfway fills this bowl. So when it's full, where it's kind of just barely sticking above the edge of the bowl, then we know it's doubled and it's time to punch down and form. So let it sit for 1.5 hours to 2 hours. Okay, it's been about 1.5 hours, and as you can see, the dough has poofed up right to the top of the bowl there. So take off our plastic and we deflate it. We're going to put a little bit of flour on our board and dump it out. You want to roll it kind of into a rope. And then we're going to cut it into 12 equal pieces. Okay, so that's half, 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 and then we'll have to cut each of these into about 3. Okay, then we take each piece and we roll it into a little ball. And if they seem like they're not evenly sized, you can take a little bit off of one and add it onto another one. Okay, after you've formed all your dough into balls, you want to just set it either on the counter or back in the bowl and cover it and let it rest for about 10 minutes so that it relaxes enough that you can roll it out. And while you're doing that, you can flour 3 cookie sheets. Just sprinkle some flour on them so that the bread doesn't stick. Then you want to roll them out into circles. And you want them about 1/4 inch thick and as round as you can get them. You don't want them too thin because then they'll turn into crackers instead of pita breads. And they kind of pop back, so you just got to keep re-rolling them until they're the right size. So that's about right. You want them, they're looking about 6 inches around and about 1/4 inch thick. And then you put them onto your floured baking sheet and you cover them with a towel and let them rest for 30 minutes. Now the good thing about making your own bread is if it doesn't come out perfectly shaped, like if it's kind of oblong or square or something, it actually helps them believe that you made it yourself, because if they look all perfect and store-bought, nobody will believe you. So this way you can just claim you were making them rustic and everybody's happy. This one's actually turning out pretty good. Okay, it took me about 15 minutes to roll these out. It might take a little longer the first time. I don't have as much practice. But you want to turn your oven on after about 15 minutes after you start the first one. So you turn the oven on to 500 and let it heat up good. If you have a pizza stone, stick that in there to heat up. If you don't, use a heavy baking sheet, like an real old cookie sheet. Just throw it in there to get it good and hot. Then you're going to need a squirt bottle and some heavy gloves or a pizza peel to get your bread in and out of the oven. So after they've been raising about 30 minutes, you can put them onto a peel, or you can just use a hand mix. Spray a little water on them, keep them pale, and slide them into your oven. And depending on how big your surface is, you might want to do only one at a time, but I have room for 2, so I do 2. And you want to cook them for about 2 minutes. And if you don't have a window in your oven, don't even look for 2 minutes. Don't open the door. But you'll see them start to poof up. You can see little bubbles starting to form on there. You can see them blowing up like balloons there. When they've gotten completely inflated, then you can go ahead and take them out. You don't want them to get brown, you just want them to get cooked all the way through. And when they're fully blown up that means they're cooked. Not going to be 2 minutes though. And that's what they look like when they're finished.
See more of Not Martha's videos at idon'tcallmemartha.blogspot.com.